Hello, I'm Matt Petrusek, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute, and welcome back to 10 Questions. We have a very special guest today on 10 Questions. Father Steve Grunow is with us. Father Steve is the executive producer of Word on Fire, the CEO of Word on Fire, and also the visionary behind the Word on Fire Institute. He is also very generous with diet and exercise advice, which has made it possible to achieve the results you see today. Father Steve, we welcome you to the studio.
Thank you very much.
All right, so you know the rules of 10 questions are typically a yes or no answer to each one of the questions. However, since we have the rule maker with us in studio today,
This is true.
you're going to see some adaptations. So question number one, first question. In historical terms, is the church living in an age that is uniquely hostile to hearing the gospel?
No.
No.
The church has been in a hostile environment in every age of its life. So I just think to say that this is kind of particular to our times, it's particularly bad, is a kind of hubris, because what are you comparing it to? What are you contrasting it to? I think that the nature of the hostility could be peculiar to the time, but that there is hostility that the church faces is a given. And I mean, if you look at the trajectory of the incarnation itself, it's not just a trajectory into humanity, it's a trajectory into hostility. So the same is for the church. So that would be my answer. I mean, if you're thinking that this is kind of worse than every other time, you're gonna have to make the case, but you're gonna have to have a good historical comparison, because at least in our environment, at least we can still proclaim the gospel openly. Now there are regions of the world where it would be much more difficult to do that, but to say that we're in a kind of persecution mode in this particular culture, I don't think that that's the case right now.
Would it be fair to say that there are unique challenges in our contemporary age that don't have a historical analog? We couldn't find an example of in the past.
It depends on how you understand history, because history is kind of a continuum. So a problem from one age is carried over into the next. So if you say that secularism is our particular problem, that's been a particular problem in the church since the Enlightenment. So it's just kind of moved along in time. So if you say technological advancement, we've been dealing with technology since the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So it's not something that's just new to us.
How about post-Christian culture? Is there a historical analog for cultures that have been Christian, abandoned Christianity, and yet still have some sort of reservoirs, sort of perverted reservoirs or ideas of what it is?
Well, would you call the Mediterranean cultures that were once part of the Byzantine Empire and very thoroughly Christian, and suddenly they're not, are those post-Christian cultures?
Oh, you're good. All right, next question. Focusing specifically on church history, so internal to the church, are we living in a uniquely dark period of ecclesial scandal and dysfunction?
No.
Another no.
It's similar to the first question. What are your historical reference points that you would say that somehow this is worse than ever before? Like, what frame of reference do you have? You have to look back in history, and certainly there were times that were worse than now. But since the corruption of the good is the worst, the church is particularly kind of seen as a symbol of a great corruption in our time. So it's like, have we seen this type of thing before? Yes, we have. The impact is felt by us to be so great because we're in the midst of that moment. But it's not unheard of in the history of the church.
Are you saying that the sort of these comparative questions, both internal to church history and then the church's relationship with the world, are you saying that those just they're not helpful questions in the end, trying to make comparisons among ages?
I don't think they are helpful. Okay. I think that there's a kind of egoism in our readings of history in which we position ourselves on the top, as if like, okay, we're at a particular moment. Like, this is the most important thing ever. Well, it is important to us because we've got a finite existence and we're being measured in time, and that we don't have, there's going to be a beginning and a middle and the end, and we know about it. And so everything is of extreme urgency and importance to us right now. But there's this long history that's running before us, and that will run after us after we're gone. So making these types of value judgments that it's the worst time ever. Is it? What's our frame of reference for that?
Right. And as you already pointed out, it's not just a historical or a time question. It's also a question about space. So you brought up, for example, think of the church in Nigeria right now, reading the internecine squabbles of Catholics in the United States and in the West. It must seem ridiculous to them.
Or they'd be saying, well, actually, our Christians here are being killed.
Right.
And you think the worst thing that happened was that someone said Mass poorly. Mm-hmm. It's like they wouldn't like that, but the thing is they would look, well, the priority here is life or death.
Right.
So there you go. I mean, you don't want to be a complete perspectivalist, but sometimes our perspective is quite narrow.
Next question. 2 influences on you have been St. John of the Cross and René Girard. Can you say a little bit about why both have been so significant for you?
I think John of the Cross was the mystic or the spiritual teacher who introduced me to what I would call the deep mysticism of the faith. That if you stay simply on the level of the propositional or even the practiced realities of the faith, you're not entirely getting it. There's something deeper. And so as Christians, we're called through propositions and through rubrics and through, traditions with a small t and pieties and all these things. We're called through those things to something deeper. And in order to kind of get there, a lot of detachment and examination of conscience and looking very intently at the role of your own ego in terms of the spiritual life is the task at hand. So I'd say that for John of the Cross, he was the one who instructed me in that. And of all the spiritual kind of teachers of the faith, he was one who resonated most deeply. I think that we all find our place within the spiritual tradition. We find a spiritual master who matters most. Mm-hmm. And I kind of look at it as they actually choose us.
Sure.
That's what happens. And then that orients you spiritually. And you become an heir to their wisdom, and then you propagate that wisdom through your way of life and through your actions and through your own teachings. So he'd be an example of that. Girard is, I think, a phenomena that you'd have a person like that in the life of the church. It's kind of like, I don't know, once in 100 years mm-hmm. or once in 500 years, someone is going to emerge that is going to illuminate the gospel in a way that people have not been thinking about it. And they're going to discern something that's incipient in the gospel that we didn't know was there. And he's one of those figures. So I think Bishop Barron referred to him as somebody who, centuries from now, we'll look at as a father of the church. Mm-hmm. And I think he's right about that. But I think he has that type of impact on the church. And really, a lot more people know about Girard now, but I don't think the church has fully come to terms yet with the impact of his thought on the life of the church itself.
For those in our audience who may not know the name René Girard or his influence, his profound influence on the church, what are one or two of his deep insights, most impactful insights?
The concept of mimesis, of how much of human behavior is influenced and oriented by imitation, mm-hmm. of how we don't really know what we want, but we look to someone else to kind of orient our desires towards an object. But also the origins of really religion in violence, and our honesty about that, and what it means, and how it still kind of is present, even in a very secularized culture.
Before I move on to the next question, let me ask a follow-up question on St. John of the Cross. So you spoke about it in highly personal terms. Do you think that contemporary Catholicism, however, could benefit from a greater mysticism overall, that it's not just sort of an individual practice or individual engagement with Christ through the mystical relationship? Can we center mysticism more in the faith, or should we?
I want to say deep mysticism.
Deep mysticism.
Deep mysticism. Because I think mysticism is kind of caricatured mm-hmm. now. I'm talking about something that's beyond those kind of caricatures of I had a spiritual experience,
Right.
or seeking after signs and wonders and things like that, or New Age type of things. If God became human in Christ so that humanity could share in the life of God, that's a proposition, but it's a statement of deep mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
Take it deeper. But if you stay on that propositional level, you're not going to get it. So I don't know what more to say in regards to that, but that's the insight I would say. And yes, right now, especially in the life of the church, I think we're fixated on things that are blocking us from what I would call the deep mysticism of the faith, and therefore an authentic and living relationship with Christ. We're fixated on those things because we won't let go of certain things that are rooted in our own ego. And when you see all this conflict in the church, which is, again, characteristic of every age of our life, but there's a remedy for that. And spiritual masters like John of the Cross, they've got the soul doctoring going on to help us through that. Soul doctoring,
that's great. Okay, next question. Is Catholic social media, so specifically Catholics on social media, Catholic social media culture capable of bearing the weight of the gospel and tradition? Or a more direct way of putting the question is has Catholic social media culture been a force for good or less than good?
I think if you look at the Catholic social media culture, it's really breaking under the weight of the church's tradition. It's, in some sense, it's able to articulate it, but it's not able to show it as a practiced and lived way of life in a manner that's absolutely convincing to people. So is force for good or force for bad? Was the second part of the question?
Right.
I think we're at a toss-up on that right now.
Is there something intrinsic to the technology itself that lends itself, that makes it easier for Catholic social media culture to be a negative influence?
I take this back to Rene Girard, and I think that every Catholic should learn what he has to say about mobs and scapegoating.
Mobs.
And they should learn that the presence of the devil or the presence of evil is manifested in a way that a lot of Catholics aren't really getting. They're not really understanding. And if they kind of are much more attentive to what Girard has to say about mimesis and scapegoating, the Catholic, and they're attentive to it to the point of conversion, I think the Catholic social media space could flourish.
Is there something about Catholic social media, so setting aside the Catholic part, is there something about social media itself in your mind that facilitates the mob and its viciousness?
Yes, it is. Yes, there is, but Catholics have proved themselves to be there's very little difference between them and the rest of the culture.
Sure.
So the technology is moving them, they're not moving the technology.
All right, next question. In terms of the Catholic faith and Catholic theology, is there a particular aesthetic in art and architecture that is to be preferred over others?
No.
Have you seen some of the churches?
Yes. You're not preferring an architectural form or style, you're preferring the beautiful, and you're saying that this particular architectural form and style manifests it better.
That's a very important nuance there. Mm-hmm. So you were speaking specifically about the style. Okay. So any style potentially can be...
Is Sagrada Familia a modern building or a pre-modern building? It's a beautiful building, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is a modern building or a pre-modern building?
I'd have to go with modern.
So if you're like, I don't like modern in terms of Catholic art and architecture, does Sagrada Familia get a pass? Maybe some people would say, no, I don't like it. Mm-hmm. But I would say it's pretty clearly a very good articulation of the true, the good, and the beautiful, and the kind of depth of the Catholic tradition. So that's my hesitancy of saying, is there one to be preferred? It's like, I think that there was bad stuff probably in the Middle Ages. There was bad stuff in the Baroque period. Mm-hmm. So if you're preferring a particular form and style that's time-bound, historically bound, just because it's old or because you have nostalgic for the experience or for that,
sure.
I think you got to go deeper than that.
What would you say are the enduring principles of beauty then that we could use as a kind of filter to, so if we're taking time period and style out of the equation, but still recognizing that beauty is a real category, what do we appeal to?
Is its ultimate reference point the incarnation of God in Christ?
That works, yeah.
So that's the manifestation of the beautiful form, is the incarnation of God in Christ. Now, when you say that, that's not just pretty.
Right, yeah.
That's just not cute or pleasing to the eye or familiar. The beautiful that's manifested in Christ is going to change your life. And so the church at its best, in every age of its life, when it's in pursuit of that beautiful and manifesting it through the work of our hands, through our imagination, through our minds, through our skills, if that's really, really kind of moving through us, something emerges which we say, aha, that's Catholic. But you're getting to something deeper when that happens. Sure. And it's because it's something that's transcending the historical circumstances. It's transcending the generational preferences in terms of aesthetics. There's something bigger going on there.
Our identification of beauty can't merely be for nostalgic reasons. Say a little bit more about what the danger of nostalgia.
Just because something's from the past doesn't mean it's better, or
that's the principle.
True or good or beautiful.
Right.
It's just older, and we have a natural kind of proclivity to reverence what is older, because our history is bound up in it. But I think you can't just say that just because something's older, it's to be necessarily preferred. I mean, slavery is a very old institution, but certainly we don't prefer it.
Not to put too fine a point on it.
Exactly. So there. Argue at that point.
Case closed.
Close the case on that.
All right. Next question.
So extreme, Father.
Well, you made the point. I think you can't debate that. All right. So what should inform Catholic literary culture and expression? So moving from the visual to the literary form.
Mm-hmm. Didn't Gabriel Marcel talk about the drama of the soul in exile as being kind of fundamental to kind of the Catholic literary project? Like that's a deep thing to say. There's some deep mysticism in that, like the drama of the soul in exile. But it just doesn't end with the exile. After this, our exile, there's a redemption and salvific reality that's kind of moving into that space of exile. And I think that the Catholic literary imagination is awash in that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
on its best days.
On its best, right. When it's at its best.
Right. And how would we compare that to, say, let's say a hypothetical story where a movie about a college student who has an atheistic professor who just rails against and shows how ignorant he is, and he's the hero of the story. Why shouldn't we make religious movies and write religious books like that?
Well, I suppose you can, but then I think you're at a very preliminary level in terms of displaying the actual truth of what it is to believe. Read the book of Genesis. And that's a presentation of what should animate the Catholic literary imagination, like that, okay? But also, there's an essay that Flannery O'Connor wrote called The Memoir of Mary Ann. Mm-hmm. And it's really a stick of dynamite that she lights and throws into a room. Yeah. Because she talks about our preference for basically the pious story that misses the point. Because the idea is there's this child being taken care of by a wonderful order of nuns called the Dominican Sisters of Hawthorne. Mm-hmm. They were founded by Nathaniel Hawthorne's daughter Rose.
Oh, wow, I didn't know.
I mean, it's amazing. But anyways, so they were taking care of a girl who had this terrible, I believe, facial cancer, and she was just a delight. The child was just a delight, and she had a line in there that it was like, the story that's told of Marianne is a story told to a culture that wonders why someone like Marianne would ever be allowed to be born. So it's like, as they tell this story, thinking this is this wonderful story of this girl who, despite this terrible cancer and this terrible deformity, is able to kind of live her life to the fullest. But it's asking that her very existence is asking us bigger questions about the meaning of life, the purpose of life, the meaning of suffering, the existence of God. All these types of things are opening up because of that. And so you don't end up with like a little pious tale that's meant to soothe and console us amid the hardships of life, so to speak. You end up with something grander and bigger when you look at that reality. And then why are these women taking care of her? Like what's motivating them? What is this way of life that says we eschew everything to take care of these people?
Right.
Who many people in our culture would say, well, euthanize them. And so it's a fantastic essay, and I think every Catholic should pass through its crucible.
What a difference from something like Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yeah.
Volumes 1 through 8. Okay, next question. The church produced and influenced culture in extraordinary ways. Historically, it's been the case, but not so much lately. So what has changed in your mind?
It seems that the saints have gone undercover. I don't doubt that they're there, but we're just not seeing them. I just think that's the difference. Where are the saints?
So in your mind, they're there, but they're invisible to the general culture right now.
I have Christian hope, so I'm hoping they're there. But I think they need to make their presence known. And because the fear is they're not there.
Right.
And then what? Like, the church is supposed to be producing saints. That's our job. That the gospel should provoke in us a level of such commitment and love for the Lord that we will aspire to lives that are like unto him, so that in meeting us, people will meet Christ. Are we seeing that? Because it's embodied. It's not an abstraction. And it's not something that you can say, well, somebody else over there is doing it.
Yeah.
Somebody else in that country is doing it or something. No, it should be evident to us.
The saints aren't the ones making the really clever memes on X.
Maybe they could be. They could be, but I don't know if that's where a saint's going.
What do you think? Is it a lack of courage? Is that the fundamental stumbling block?
I think everyone has to examine their own conscience. I mean, I don't think that there's one reason for it, but like maybe it's a question we just don't know anymore what the church is for. We don't accept that the church is something that's supposed to change us. It's supposed to reorient our disposition towards life itself. Right. Because the church and is the body of Christ, and Christ's body is supposed to be changing us. It's like that's supposed to be the mystery, the great mystery of the Blessed Sacrament. That as we take that into ourselves, we become like him.
And what I'm thinking as you say this is saints are public. Sainthood is not, it's an interior spirituality. Yeah. It overflows.
Right. It isn't just here I am content with my relationship with Jesus in the privacy of my home. And so it's like a freedom of worship model that, well, I go to church sometimes and then that's about it. And then I have there's this other reality out there and I just interact with it. Saints would never recognize that distinction as being at all valid. They'd be like, what? Yeah, right. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. But I think maybe it could be that too many of us think it does make sense.
And what about the claim, before we move on to the next question, that sainthood is for other people? Not me. I'm too much of a sinner to be a saint. But other people, I certainly support them being saints.
Well, I just see that as a refusal of Christ. And again, I mean, I have to examine my own conscience in relation to that. I think everybody does. It's like, so why do you think that in the providence of God, you were baptized? It didn't have to happen.
Yeah.
You think it was a joke? Do you think it was like a mistake? It's like, no. And so if you were kind of called, you were set apart by Christ for the church, that means that he has pretty good kind of hope that you could aspire to be a saint, that you're going to give it a try. And the things, saints are always in some way inhibited by their sinfulness, but it's like, that doesn't hold them back.
Right.
And in fact, that they use that kind of the resistance of that as something that kind of moves them forward in mission.
That's beautiful. Next question. Should the church use AI, artificial intelligence, to evangelize?
What do you mean by artificial intelligence?
Well, the way it's currently being used, for example, with a program like ChatGPT, where it mimics what we would call a human response in providing answers to questions.
Okay, I would say that ChatGPT is just a data aggregator. And because its algorithms are so kind of fine-tuned to probabilities, you think it's thinking. But it's not. It's just a modified search engine. It's a search engine on steroids, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's being sold to you as if it's a thinking machine, but it really isn't.
So let's say we have a clear understanding.
So my answer to your question is coming from this clarification.
Sure.
Okay. We're already using it. The church is already using artificial intelligence. Every time you pull that cell phone out of your pocket and use it.
I left it in the office just in case.
You're using it. The church is using it. People are using AI. It's integrated into systems of parish life, diocesan life, the Vatican. We're all wired in a way to be connected to artificial intelligence.
So is it a moot question at this point?
I think that you're asking a question that really is like, what does the future hold for us in terms of if machines start thinking?
Okay.
And so that's more of an abstract and theoretical
right.
question. But the actual fact of it is we are using artificial intelligence right now. And just to recognize that. And those who complain some of the people complain the loudest about artificial intelligence in the church, they're doing it with artificial intelligence. They're using data aggregating machines to make their opinions known. So, and then I'll get you back to the AI priest, so to speak. A tempest in a teapot. Basically, they created a product that had a caricature at the face of it, but all it was a data aggregator.
Right.
And so I think that there was a response. The response is very interesting to kind of examine now that the dust has settled on it. Like, why was there this response? But an earlier form of data aggregation is a book. I mean, and it's a very simplistic way, and I'm sure some people are going to argue with me about this comparison, but if we had a book in which we had a caricature, like a character of a priest, I'm Father Al, and I answer your Catholic questions, and they're all in the book, and he's there. We probably would have had no argument with that. But there was something about the technological presentation that threw people off, and that's where you have to kind of, as I said, as the dust settles, what was that really all about? But going back to my original point. Should the church use artificial intelligence? We're already using it.
So let's take that for granted that we're already using it. We can't not use it in some sense insofar as we're going to use data aggregating machines. Are there limits in how it should be used? Or are there ways that we should not present the data that it's aggregating? For example, using an avatar.
Well, then I think that the closest example to where the church should probably be intervening in terms of its moral authority is social media. That's where I'd say it. And the thing is that the problem there is not just the machine, it's the people. It's the actual flesh and blood people. And so the moral predicament is not just the technology. The moral predicament is ourselves.
Right.
And I think at times we're like projecting at the machine as being the problem, when it's like, no, we've decided to use these devices in these malevolent ways. And that's the moral predicament. And now has the church spoken, in a very strong way about that. I think we'll probably get there, but not yet.
All right, next question. Should the church take an active public role in contributing to political debates?
How's that worked in the past?
Fabulously.
Okay, so in 1527, Pope Clement VII gets into kind of a controversy in Europe because Charles V is in his ascendancy and he's consolidating power all over the continent. And so he enters into alliance with the King of France and then several kind of Italian principalities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this causes a lot of consternation by Charles V. The papacy has gotten involved in basically a political debate about how the continent should be governed and who should govern it. And it ends up with the sack of Rome. So not that good. But the thing is that if you think the church should be actively involved in politics, we have the longest track record in Western civilization for the past 2,000 years of what happens when the church gets actively involved in politics. Now, sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're on the bottom, and sometimes you're in the basement. So if people like on the abstract say, wouldn't it be great if we had the Catholic Church as this kind of ascendant political movement, like a political party? Could be good for a while, but you're going to pay a price.
Yeah.
So it's just have a sober understanding of what is meant by that.
How about political debates? And we distinguish political from
what does the church interject into the political debate?
Well, we could say in the contemporary context, looking at the parties as they are in the United States, neither one of them represents Catholic social thought, right? Both of them fundamentally disagree with deep values in the Catholic social thought tradition. So is it valuable for Catholics to speak that tradition into the political?
I guess in our current political construct, lay Catholics could form a political party based upon Catholic social teaching, but then they're in the arena. People aren't going to necessarily vote for them just because they say we have divine authority to teach in these ways. So you're just in the political arena with everybody else. I suppose lay Catholics could do that.
So is the advice, don't do it or do it with your eyes wide open?
If you're talking about it at the level of the magisterium, the magisterium articulates moral principles and proposes them. But people have to appropriate those moral principles. I'll just channel like Cardinal George in that when he was kind of confronted by some lay people on this issue, I believe it was similar. But he said, the bishops don't run this country. You run this country. And so if there's all these problems and things that are going wrong, blaming the bishops is kind of really beside the point. It's like, how are you invested in the political order?
Mm-hmm.
Have you internalized these moral principles in such a way that they're convincing to others so that it could move the electorate? But that's the current kind of political circumstances that we live. But as far as the church's involvement, even at that level, you have to have a sober understanding that politics is a wheel of fortune and it's going round.
Yeah.
And the thing is that you could be at the top and then you can suddenly be at the bottom. And the bottom is not that comfortable a place to be, particularly if the church gets positioned there. What happened after the French Revolution?
Oh, yeah.
Did Catholicism ever recover in England? I mean, the Chancellor of England was a Roman Catholic cardinal. But has it ever recovered from that?
Right.
So it's just like, don't be too naively idealistic about how the church can engage political realities. There's a risk and there's a cost.
Can Western civilization survive without the church?
No.
Once the church is properly positioned in the political arena?
No, the church has to position itself in any culture. But Western civilization itself, if the church goes away, that culture will be destroyed. It's integral to it. The culture is like growing out of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And if we've been cutting branches off that tree for many years, and we're getting to the point that you're going to kill the organism itself. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. Now, it might kind of rankle some secularists that I said that, but I think we're seeing it. you can't kind of just disentangle or cut yourself away from the church in Western civilization and have anything that's going to survive.
What in your mind are the most foundational contributions the church makes that to Western civilization that makes it possible?
Right now, the dignity of the human person.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the relationship of mind, spirit, and matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, how do you have ethics if you have no transcendental reference point in which to argue for their existence? I mean, there's lots of things that the church has been deliberating over centuries that is given life to this civilization. And we're cutting that thing apart at our own peril.
In your response to the critique, say from a secular perspective, well, we can retrieve a conception of dignity. We'll call it autonomy.
Good luck. How's that working out? It would be the thing.
Well.
How's that working out?
Not
it's like you haven't come up with anything better. So
I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm just saying. How's that working out for you?
Not well. All right, next question. Is there a vocations crisis in the West? And if so, what do you think are its main contributing factors?
At this point in time,
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a vocation crisis that's linked to a crisis in families and in human beings. That there isn't a kind of prevailing sense that there is a meaning and purpose to existence, that one can have a relationship with God for which you can kind of give your life towards. And I also think that the vocation crisis is largely rooted in the fact that people just don't have children anymore in the West. And so it's the manifestation of a demographic reality. Like, of course there's less clergy. There's less people being born.
Yeah.
And that's probably the best variable or correlate to look at.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what the Catholic online community will say to you is bad catechesis. The priests aren't doing the job. The bishops aren't doing their job.
Yeah, like somebody's got to pay. It's somebody's fault, but it's never our fault.
Yeah.
It's never something for what I have done and what I have failed to do. It's somebody out there. I'm just not convinced by those arguments. How did we get to this demographic reality?
Right.
How did we get there? Bad catechesis? I suppose you could say that could be a contributing factor. But you can catechize very well, but do people believe it?
Right.
And also it's placing an emphasis on the propositional reality of the faith, almost singularly. Like, we can kind of will you into the church by convincing arguments, or we can will you into a life of sanctity by convincing arguments. Or you just have to get these propositions right, and then sanctity will happen to you. It's like you're not quite there yet. You're not quite there yet
Yeah.
with the mystery of vocation and the mystery of divine grace. So we all have answers for it, and we're all gonna cling to something. Usually because there's a presupposition in mind that we believe should be supported, and it might. It's not like, well, I guess we just shouldn't be concerned about catechesis at all. You know, that's not it at all, or that it's not important or something like that. It's just, we're dealing with deeper realities than that. How do you convince people that, again, like that a life in Jesus Christ in which you give your life to Him fully and completely is worth it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, people have to see it. They have to see that life being lived out. And the other thing is that you can't just think that if we get all the propositions right and we get all the rubrics right, that suddenly faith breaks out all over. I think that for a lot of people, like, we'd have a more satisfying experience of Catholicism because it would bring what we would perceive to be order from the chaos.
Right.
But are we growing in charity because of that? Because the true directionality of doctrine and worship, and which is related to propositions and rubrics, things like that, is charity. And it's charity that you see in the life of the saints that makes you have through them, or there's an invitation to know Christ.
So if I say to you, Father Steve, I agree with you, but the problem is we have to start with a more beautiful liturgy, and that's going to inspire belief, which is going to inspire charity, which is going to fix this problem.
I'd say you're a person of hope in saying, okay, and I'd say set about that project, and if that project produces Vincent de Paul or Teresa of Calcutta, you might be onto something.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where you've got to give it a try. Its orientation can't be like, I had the most glorious personal aesthetic experience of the Mass, and I'm so pleased to go there. And that's it. That's it. Like, what is that all it's supposed to generate?
Right.
Because then I think it's kind of like spiritual solipsism is going on there. So it's like if what you're proposing as a solution is something you're going to freely attend to, and you're going to become a manifestation of Christ in the world that is revealed in love, then go for it. Now, usually when people have, and we're talking about extremists in the church, usually have like, this is the plan. They want to impose it. And that's, to me, is a red flag that there's something off.
Mm-hmm.
When it's say, like, in order to do this, we have to begin imposing it on everybody. It's not a free offer of grace anymore.
Yeah.
And is love something that's imposed?
No.
No. So that's my answer to the question.
Next question. Do you believe in the devil and the influence of malign spirits in human affairs?
The devil exists not because I believe in the devil, because if I say I believe in the devil, it's almost like I'm making an act of faith in him. It's like the devil exists and malign spirits exist. So that's my preliminary answer. And you look puzzled right now.
Are they active in human affairs?
Sure. How could you look at human affairs and say that they're not?
The critique of the generic conception of the devil in the church nowadays is that the devil has now been socialized. It's been turned into a sociological category. It's been turned into just a generic understanding of sin, and we don't take the devil seriously enough in any form of our life.
How about we say that those things are true about the devil? The devil is a spiritual entity and an immaterial entity. And when you begin to talk about sociological influences or the other categories you're using, those are immaterial categories. And so the devil would be manifesting herself or himself in those particular ways. I think that we're always looking for the devil out there.
Right.
When you need to look to the devil in you. It's like the concept of the Antichrist, which we project out into history, and we're like, well, it's like Hitler, or it's like a person who's going to emerge, in the future. It's like the Antichrist is in all our refusals of Christ. So all of us have a no to Christ in us, which is our Antichrist, and that goes to work, and it influences our decisions. It insinuates itself into our lives through every small no that we have to the gospel. And so that's an Antichrist. Now, how is that spiritual? How is that spirit working on you? So I really think that the issue is the externalization of the devil in such a way that he almost becomes a caricature or like something that's out there rather than something that's immediate to ourselves. It's like and we fall into this trap with hell too. Mm-hmm. We're very concerned about the hell of eschatological import, and I'm not saying that that's not significant, But there's a hell that we're firing up in ourselves all the time. And it's like, if we don't stop that, that's going to become permanent. That's our eternal state. So it's like, you're worried about hell. Worry first about the hell that you're growing inside of you. You're worried about the devil. Worry about that devil that you're growing inside of yourself, that you're feeding. And that's where kind of the spiritual practices of the church are meant to be at play. Mm-hmm. They're not just out there as like performative things. They're meant to deal with the inclinations within ourselves that are hellish and demonic. And how do we see that in the world? Cruelty. That's how we see it. That we are terribly cruel towards one another. And at the root of that, I would say, it's the hell and the devil that are at work in us and that we're growing all the time.
It's such a salutary vision you're laying out for understanding the devil and the devil's influence. Let me speak as a parent, as a follow-up question. I think it's easy to satirize the people, again, online who are sort of scanning the culture, doing the devil scans, and, it stops like, oh, Taylor Swift, oh, Polka Man, it's the devil's everywhere. However, I again, speaking as a parent, I think there are some manifestations of evil in some forms of popular culture. Are you saying that that's not worthwhile to be looking for the devil out there?
I'm saying that the impact is going to be in you. The impact of those spirits in the culture is going to be in you. It's like you can rail against them as cultural forms, but you're taking them in all the time. And you, even in if people have become so preoccupied by it, they're letting all that devil speak into their minds all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just like, once you do that, it's like you think you're directing things against the devil, but the devil's far more cunning than that. And so it's just like you're likely doing the devil's business. Mm-hmm. So that's where it becomes very, very difficult. And I would say that in relation to this is the wisdom of the church in terms of like spiritual warfare and the devil is who's the fighter? Who's the fighter?
Yeah, not us.
It's not us, because we would, by ourselves, we would fail every time. The fighter is Christ. And it's just like, so the first act of resistance to the devil is an act of humility in which you put Christ in front of you. You say, no, Lord, you gotta help with this. I don't have magic powers. I don't have this angelic resilience and intelligence. This thing is greater than me. Christ has to be in front of it. But the thing is, that's where he wants to be. He wants to fight this. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we're like, oh, no, I can take care of this. I'm going to go take care of this thing.
I watched a video on YouTube.
And it's like, no. It's like, put me in front of it. That's what Jesus is saying. I've shown you I can defeat this. I can defeat this evil one. And so call upon him to do that. But I think at times it's our own pride and our own like quest for kind of power. Like, wouldn't it be great if I had power over demons? Like, oh man, I would just triumph if I did that. And then we also become fascinated as like, that guy's fighting demons. Wow, I'm going to be interested in that. It's like, God help him if he is.
Yeah.
So some kind of transformation of mind, I think, is related to this too. But I'll say this one thing and then get back to Gerard. How does the devil manifest himself in the world most often? Now, I gave cruelty as an action, as a way. But I think that times we think it's like the devil manifests himself in special effects. Like the lights are going to go on and off, or I've got a sinking feeling or something. And I guess that if the devil wants to scare you, he could do those types of things. But look at the mob, and look at how the mob influences you. And look at how important it is for you to be aligned with others in projects, goals, planning, whatever it is, and how quickly that turns against someone. Look at how the social order is so easily oriented to finding someone to attack.
Right.
And it's like, that's the devil. That's the devil. That's the devil we have to be most afraid of, because it's the devil manifesting himself in his most powerful and frightening form. When all of us become possessed in a common direction towards a person,
usually under the
or a
guise
group
of righteousness
of
too.
good. It's like, wouldn't it be a good thing
Yeah.
if we got rid of this or got rid of him or got rid of her? That's the problem. How better our lives would be. And if that's happening, you should pause. You should pause and you should begin to ask yourself, when the mob forms, am I going to be standing up against it or am I going to be standing in it? And I just think people need to read the Gospels much more carefully, that the cross happens at the behest of a mob. And once that mob has done its work, the Gospel says they went home beating their breasts. The regret that will follow you for the rest of your life if you give in to that type of demonic manifestation, it's with you for a long, long time.
There's another question I need to get to, but it's so pertinent perennially, but especially in our current culture and political environment. The danger you've identified is a very potent one. How do we distinguish the mob from a truly goodwill founded and oriented movement to try and better society by targeting bad ideas and maybe even bad people who are harming others? How do we make a distinction between that?
There isn't an easy distinction. That's the predicament that humanity is in. And that's why we have the gospel. That's the necessity of the Christian presence in the culture, and of an authentic Christianity that is able to flourish in some form. Because that's what's showing us the truth of who we are. We're not going to arrive at that ourselves.
So you gave a talk recently to us at Word on Fire, and it became out in a book, Beatitudes, Parables, and the Cross of Jesus. And there's one part that I wanted to ask you specifically about, has to do with spirituality, because this is a word that I think has become highly secularized, and yet it's the center of your argument. So you write, spirituality is the experience of divine illumination, light cast into the darkness of what cannot be explained. It is a way of seeing a deep mysticism originating in the incarnation of Christ and oriented by direct contact with our own humanity and the humanity of others. Now, I took some spirituality courses back in my own education, and it was something very different than this. Okay. So why is spirituality still a helpful category when it has been contaminated by secular ideas?
What was the definition that you had?
Generically, a kind of sense of self-realization, if I had to summarize it. That spirituality is highly personalized and focused on feeling good about oneself.
So you're asking me, do I buy into the definition of spirituality?
No, I'm asking you because,
Or why is my definition the way that it is?
Why is spirituality still a helpful category given its misuse? And it cross-culturally, as you know, people say, well, I'm spiritual.
Why is the church helpful given its misuse over time? So something kind of is given to us, and we misuse it, and then we say, well, that's not helpful, as if the thing in itself was the problem.
Right.
Spirituality is a legacy of Christ in the church. It's a gift of Christ to his church. And so just because it's been misconstrued or turned into kind of secular boilerplate for some other agenda doesn't mean we should abandon it. It means that we should re-engage it and engage it at its depth. So that would be my answer to it. It's just like, well, again, why do you throw something away because we misuse it?
I suppose the response would be because the term, the phrase, I'm spiritual but not religious has become so permeated in the culture that it may be difficult from an evangelical perspective to use spirituality and not immediately be put into that category.
Yeah, but so we're going to be abandoning all these terms because people misuse it? Well, what about the term Christian? That's got a lot of baggage to it.
Sure.
Negative baggage to it. So, but we're going to, how about Catholic? Catholic is...
It's also a keeper.
Oh, we're going to keep that one too. Like, so spirituality, we're not going to use that one because it's got baggage. See, this seems to be a little bit selective to deal, like if we can change the grammar, we can change the word, we can change the reality.
And somehow be more evangelically effective, you say that's not the path.
Because you have a point of contact. So people are interested in spirituality. So present authentic spirituality to them instead of, and they might be surprised. And they might be convinced.
Okay, so I'm writing keep spirituality. Okay, final question.
You can put that in my permanent record.
It is done. All right. Is a half a dozen eggs the ideal amount of eggs to eat in one sitting to maximize muscle mass?
So what are you getting at here?
Well, as a fellow fitness enthusiast, obviously, fitness is a big part of your life.
Yes, this is what inquiring minds want to know.
Yes, it is, including this mind that's inquiring. So how does fitness relate to who you fundamentally are as Father Steve Grunow and as a priest as well? Fitness and diet, living a healthy life.
I'll take this back to John of the Cross. And I'm paraphrasing him. If something is difficult, it's likely something that God wants you to do. You got to prepare yourself to kind of make that decision when the difficult things happen. Okay? And one way to prepare yourself to difficulty is to habituate yourself to difficult things. And what you begin to notice just on the level of physical fitness or nutrition or things like that is that if you choose the more difficult option, you actually become better at the difficulty. Mm-hmm. If you eschew it, it gets harder and harder and harder, and then you don't want to do it at all. So there's a lesson in weight training and bodybuilding and fitness and things like that that is not just focused on optimal health or achievement in the sport. It's having things in your life that you can practice daily that are immediate to concrete experience that are difficult. And if you look at our culture, one of the things we have a lot of difficulty with is food and a sedentary lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And it's having great personal and social consequences. And why don't we want to engage that? Because it's difficult. But going to a spiritual master like John of the Cross, going back to him, if something is difficult, it's likely something that God wants you to do.
Father Steve, this has been an extraordinary experience for me. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for being with us on another episode of 10 Questions, this extended version. For those of you who are not yet members of the Word on Fire Institute, we warmly invite you to join us at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.